Hi, everyone, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 18 of The Fix. I'm Angel Borrelli, and in this episode of my preseason series, I am so happy to have guest coach Larry Owens. As you know, Larry is the head coach at Bellarmine University. Hey, Larry.
Hey, Angel. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Very well, very well.
Awesome. So congratulations on your wins from this last weekend.
Well, thank you very much. Wins are always nice.
They are. So a few weeks ago, a coach from the East Coast, David, hi David, sent in some questions about the stride. I probably get more questions about the stride than any other thing. And you have sent me some recent videos having some questions about the stride. So for all you coaches out there wondering about the stride, I've decided to talk about it today.
Perfect.
Great. And then this is how we're going to do it. So, you know, coaches, sometimes when you have trouble teaching something, and I know, David, you were getting frustrated because you were teaching, but the kids weren't getting it. Sometimes when you're teaching, and of course, teaching is what I do all day long, sometimes it's because you yourself have a blind spot or are missing a little piece of information that could open up a whole new world on how to teach something. So the way that I'm going to set this up for everyone is we're going to do the visuals at the end so that I get to reteach what I'm going to be talking to you about at the beginning, because I think it's so fascinating, the stride, the role it has, and the fact that most issues with velocity and location are really created by the stride, not by the velocity, not by the hand, but really how you end up getting to the front foot. And so it's a fascinating topic. And I want to talk about it on a conceptual level before I get into the visuals. And what I will be teaching today are one or two drills I use. I have a million, so I distilled it down to something I think important, a step-by-step situation, and also some visuals on most of the things I'm going to be talking about. Also some strength movements that I have done with some of my pitchers. So if we're ready, let's get started. So first of all, I think that it's so important that when you are trying to teach something, you understand it completely. And sometimes the way to understand something for a coach is to actually have to feel it. So for those of you coaches who are not pitchers, and frequently I get that. I wasn't a pitcher. I don't know how to teach this, but I suggest that even if you're going to take a stab at it, especially with the drills I've created, that you actually do them yourself. And they're simple enough for you to do and feel yourself. Nothing is a better teacher than your own feel for something. And then when you see a pitcher not doing something, you can make reference to what you felt, and then you're able to teach from a different level. So first of all, people I don't think understand what the stride actually is or where it occurs in the motion, because when you look at the pitching motion, it looks like one big blur. Not to you though, Larry, probably, right?
Well, I hope not.
Yeah, exactly. But to most people and most coaches, it can look like a big blur, like where do the positions start and stop? So as a kinesiologist, an analytical kinesiologist, when we're in graduate school, we have to take every motion we study and we have to break it down into phases. And the phase of the stride actually begins at the top of the knee lift, at the top, not when he takes his signs, lifts his knee. It actually begins at the top of the knee lift. So the top of the knee lift is where the stride begins. And then when the pitcher makes contact with the ground with his lead leg, and that contact can be a number of different parts of his foot, some which we like, some which we don't, that signifies the end of the stride phase. And the reason why we have to break things down into phases, especially when you've got a sport that has an upper and lower body movement that needs to be synchronized, you have to be able to identify what's supposed to be happening in that phase with the upper body. Where is this supposed to be? Where is the hip supposed to be during this phase? And what do you call that phase? And and we have to give it, as analysts, there's tons of different characteristics of it so that I can look at this phase specifically and I can say, okay, his hip isn't in the right place. His arm's not in the right place, because we have very defined parameters about that. That is what's so cool about it. Now, it's very important to add where it occurs, because one of the things as a troubleshooter and as an analyst that is very important is to understand that the way motion is created, if there's a problem with the stride, it oftentimes occurs at the phase prior to it. So, what a pitcher does before he gets to the top of his knee lift can actually be causing the problem with the stride. What the pitcher does during the stride prior to his landing can cause a problem for the next phase, which is rotation. So this is where we start to talk about, well, what is the purpose of this and how does it cause problems for the rest of the motion? So going back a step, the purpose of the pitching motion is for the pitcher to position himself where he's looking at his target and he's delivering the ball with acceleration, with location, and that he's doing that from a stable position so he can do what he needs to do with the ball and not just fall into it, like just letting the ball go because his motion was out of control. So that's the purpose of the pitching motion. The purpose of the stride is to get the pitcher down to the bottom of the hill onto two legs because he's on one leg, get him onto two legs without any rotation occurring. And remember, the end of the stride phase is when the foot touches the ground, because the next movement is going to be the next phase, which is rotation. We don't want any rotation in this phase of the motion. The stride phase is a side-to-side phase. And I may use these directions during the whole show. So we'll call the plate north and we'll call the rubber the south direction. So when a pitcher is going from south to north, we want him staying on that straight line. We don't want him doing any rotation during this phase. It's almost sort of a neutral phase to rotation, because when the rotation occurs, he's going to develop velocity, and he can really only develop it during rotation. And the rotation has to occur once his foot is down. So if he's rotating before the foot goes down, if he's rotating anywhere, hip or shoulder, then you're getting early rotation, and it's going to subtract from the math equation that creates the velocity. So the stride goes from the rubber to the plate, straight line, straight direction, and its role is to provide a base so that when the pitcher starts to turn, he's actually in a great position to turn. Therefore, we want to make sure he lands in a way that allows that rotation, that he's in a direction that allows rotation, and that also he's got a timing to it so that the upper body can do what it has to do, which is to, of course, come up to the shoulder position. And this show today is mostly about the lower body because that is where the issues occur. The arms, if the lower body has control over itself, the arms usually will go along with it. So this is very important to understand. You can't teach the timing of the lower body or the upper body if the lower body isn't happening. Does all this make sense so far, Larry?
Absolutely. And I'm going to have some questions for you. So just let me know when I can ask away.
Okay. Well, why don't you ask a question right now with regards to all I've said, which is the beginning of the phase. The beginning of the stride phase is at the top of the knee lift. So if you were filming, you have to kind of go back and forth to see where's his top. And on the moment before he descends, that's his top. So that's the stride phase. And then the end of it is when he touches ground with his front foot. So that's the definition of the stride phase. Is your question pertinent to that part?
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So is there a specific height of the leg lift that is desired? I mean, I personally don't care a ton, but I do think that it has some importance.
Yes, that's a great question because, as I just said, if there's a problem with the stride, you have to look at the phase prior to it. And the phase prior to it is when he lifts his knee. So, for example, what you heard me say is the stride has to be a straight line towards the plate. with his foot landing in a place. And one of the photos I have, one of the videos I have, is how to determine where that pitcher's foot should land. Because we know that we want it to land correctly, so that it's in a position that it's in during our life. When a pitcher is facing forward and he is about to go over his front leg, his feet and his legs kind of have to be in a configuration that we're in all day long. Where the left foot's on the left, the right foot's on the right. You don't have the left foot crossed over the right foot, if you're a right-handed pitcher. So the knee lift. So here's the deal about the knee lift. First of all, I think the knee lift is the most personal thing for a pitcher. All pitchers develop a knee lift based on something they feel, and also the way they feel it loads their back hip the best, because that's one of the qualities of a good start position of a stride. So the knee lift is something, and this is what I do with all the crazy things I see when a pitcher comes in with a crazy something. I always know it's who he is. It's probably part of his swag. There's more swag that goes on during the phase of the knee lift than any other phase.
Mm-hmm.
This is where a pitcher gets to show what's up. It's like when he takes his signs and when he lifts his knee, it's like, that's who he is. Welcome to his world. And so I don't change it unless I need to. So the way I'm going to look at it is, does that knee lift create a problem for where he's going next? So, for example, let's say during the first phase, he has a crazy knee lift where he winds up, and let's say he turns to the outfield and he's got total craziness. And when he lowers his leg, because he was so crazy, he has to swing around in a way, and his foot just lands like in a place where he can't even get his hips through when he pitches. That's when you may want to say, okay, his knee lift is not serving the next part of the pitching motion. And by the way, if his knee lift causes problems for the stride, and the stride causes problem for the rotation, the very last part of the body that comes through is left to make the adjustment to get the arm ready to throw. And that's why injuries occur. So the way you know a knee lift is too high, too something, is that it causes a problem. And when I see a crazy knee lift, I always immediately look to see, did he land correctly from it? And if he somehow pulled himself out of it and lands correctly, in other words, he's not turning funny, he doesn't lead with the elbow because he's off balance, et cetera, then I always say to him, listen, I'm not touching your knee lift, but just know you're going around the block to land, and you're doing a great job of pulling yourself out of it, but it may be costing you something. And so that's the way I deal with that. But the knee lift height itself is so personal. You really have to look at what happens next, even when a pitcher counter rotates, which we know many of them do, which is not really efficient because you're rotating in a direction you're not going. There's a million scientific reasons why when a scientist like myself is teaching the motion, I cannot teach bells and whistles. That is not me staying in my lane. My job is, I'm the English teacher that teaches perfect grammar. And then when you have that grammar, you can go ahead and say ain't all you want or use some weird tense, but you have to know what's right. And then you go ahead and develop something that puts some bells and whistles on it if you want. So that's the answer to that knee lift question.
Right. The bells and whistles would be Louis Tiant, Gene Garber, which I don't know if you've seen them, but they turn over the rubber. A modern day guy would be like Johnny Cueto,
right?
Turns over the rubber, but still can somehow get where he needs to be. Now, the other thing, what about when the leg begins to come down or the leg is lifted to its highest point, that initiates the stride phase, and then where he lands? You said a straight line, straight line's relative. For the longest time, and I think you and I have talked about this before, for the longest time, I was taught, ball of foot to ball of foot, back foot, front foot, target. And they should be in a somewhat of a straight line. So the guys that do throw across their body somewhat, or their direction is poor, or the right-handed pitcher steps toward the third base line, the left-handed pitcher steps towards the first base line. What would be ideal? The direction. And I think you've explained it, before, but I think it's worth hearing again.
I'm going to actually be, that's going to be one of the first videos that I put up. And so, but let me just say this, and I want everyone to start picturing these things so that you're hearing it a second time when you're seeing it. So when a pitcher is standing on the rubber and he's taking his signs, and let's say he's a pitcher who takes his signs with both feet actually underneath him, facing the direction that you might be standing in if you're about to take a step. So both feet are straight. It's not, you're not tilted, crooked, some of the ways they take it. Let's say he's a right-handed pitcher. If he were to stand there and lunge out with his left leg, just like he does on the field when he does walking lunges, just like he walks, where his left foot goes straight ahead from his hip joint. Now, the hip joints, everybody, people think of the hips and they think of them at the side. That's where hip muscles are. But the joints, if you put your hands in your pockets, you're wearing jeans, where your fingertips are, that's where the joint is at. It's in the front. So, I mean, that's the way you want to think about it. It sort of angles out, but to keep it uncomplicated, you want to always do all your leg movements in life. So the way a person runs, the way they walk straight ahead, the way they lunge are all going to have foot landings of one leg exactly in the position it should land when you stride. Does that make sense?
100%. Absolutely.
Now, the reason is because when he's facing the target, the hips, which really generate the first level of rotation, they have to be able to get around completely. But they can't if your feet are crossed over. You cannot square up your pelvis. You can't even rotate with the pelvis completely. So you're getting inefficient rotation. Now, do guys who get inefficient rotation still throw 96 miles an hour? Yes. Could they throw 100 if they didn't? Yes. Is their arm action healthy? No. But do they still throw strikes? Yes. Will they get injured? Probably not, maybe right now, but you're doing something incorrectly. So thus, I can't teach it. But there's amazing pitchers that have, and this is what you coaches like, because if they step out and they're all crossed up, when they turn, they're turning in a non-efficient way. They're off balance. So their arm's doing something strange. And while they're doing something strange with their arm, they're hiding the ball in a way where it comes out from nowhere. And of course, you coaches love that because you go, whoa, the hitters can't even see it coming. And that's because he's usually coming from around the side or throwing sidearm or something because his arms have to accommodate what the position his body's in. So when I show you how to test where the efficient stride is. So if you're not having any problems with your pitchers where he's stepping, the pitcher, if in the upper body phase, is not going to be as efficient. So he's not. Here's my job. My job is to bring out the full potential of the pitcher. And if he's doing something that's not efficient, but he does it well, you can do anything well if you practice it enough. My job isn't to say, oh, you do that well, I'm leaving it alone. My job is to say, hey, you want to be better? Let's do this. And the cool thing about a landing is that when you fix a pitcher's landing, you don't have to say, okay, so now let's fix your upper body. Guess what? If your feet are underneath you, all the stuff you do that makes you great, that stuff still happens, but it happens at the right time and in the right space in the air when you come through. You will automatically, because the pitcher already knows how to bring his arm through, but if he's not bringing it through correctly because his hips didn't rotate. So you never have to teach anything else. You just have to change one thing and it brings everything back to balance. That's what's so cool about understanding what the most perfect, efficient stride is. And pitchers that have efficient strides, like a Verlander, like a Cole, which I talked about, when I watched them pitching, during the playoffs. The reason why they're so good is because their stride is so good. You're really only as good as your stride, and your potential is unlimited if you have that part of your motion correct. If you don't, you're going to have a ceiling to your velocity. And also, usually end up with some injury in your elbow or shoulder because you can't come through correctly. So does that make sense, Larry?
100%. That one piece of information is probably, just from the few years you and I, got to know each other and talk, that piece of information has probably helped me and our team and our pitchers probably more than anything.
And are you talking about the
Direction.
direction? I know. It's so cool. And let me ask you, so when you've changed maybe a foot landing, would you notice that you don't have to touch anything else? Everything else they do as a pitcher just happens better.
Absolutely, it does, and then everything improves. I think it command, their ability to, throw the ball where they want to improves. I mean, everything improves.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Now, just as I mentioned that we know the rotation phase is the important phase because the pitcher is going sideways down the hill, then he's turning to face his target, and then he's going to throw. So the turning phase is critical. That's why the stride is critical. You don't create velocity during the stride. You can't create velocity during the stride. The velocity, the energy is transferred once the front foot hits. If you're doing something that doesn't allow the front foot to hit correctly or in an optimal place, you're going to affect the velocity. If your foot lands in a crazy place, so everybody, when the next time you're standing up, just if you're a righty, take your left leg and just cross it way over your right leg when you're just standing there and see what it does to your hips. It twists them backwards. It twists them. They'll be on a diagonal. So stand straight, take your left leg, stand right across your right leg, and notice how it twists everything. When you're twisted like that, you're going to come through in your delivery incorrectly. But you as a pitcher, especially the good ones that do this, they know how to get the job done. So they're contorting their forearm and everything to get behind the ball. And when you see location problems and you know you have a good pitcher and you see him twisting, he's on the side of the ball, or when you're looking at your spin rate, you're seeing spin types that you don't want to look at, you don't want to see, go to his stride. Because the stride is the last moment when the position of the pitcher is dictated. Once he's in that position, he's not going to be able to change where that lead leg has landed. And oftentimes when you see a pitcher, and here's the telltale sign. I mean, if you don't work with a camera and you're going, well, how am I going to see this? Stand behind the catcher. If your pitcher has to lift his back leg off, and he's rotating and delivering the ball with only one foot on the ground, that's your telltale answer that his stride direction was incorrect. Because if you do this little thing I told you to stand up and cross over your lead leg across your body and you notice your hips are all twisted, your back foot wants to come off the ground so badly just to get into a normal position. The back foot should not have to correct the stride. The back foot should be staying on the ground, using the force from the ground to create the intensity to move the stride forward. And then the back foot turns the rear hip. Now you've got two hips facing the plate. But if he has to pull that back foot off, just imagine who's going to be stronger. The guy who has 2 feet on the ground when he leans forward over his leg to release the ball, or the guy who just came out of a twisted pretzel position, and except for the first second, he was on his rear leg and then he was only on his front leg, twisting and rotating with one leg on the ground. Now, Larry, I know you've seen that, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
All the time. You see it in the big leagues. You see it all the time. You see it everywhere.
Yeah. And all these guys, what I want everyone to know is, so first of all, everything I teach is to give you more information. Also, the drills and stuff are to spark your creativity. But always know, yes, there's guys who do it all kinds of crazy ways. You know, most of those guys you see, it's in their DNA to pitch. They know how to do it. They're gamers, and they pull out the strike any way they can, and they do a good job of it. My job is different. They come to me and say, I know I have more in me. My elbow keeps hurting. They're complaining and they're saying, please look at me and tell me where can I make an improvement? And that is the perspective from which I come. So it's not like, okay, everybody how could you be saying this, Angel? Because there's guys who pitch 100 miles an hour and they're making all these errors. So then, therefore, it's not an error. No, guess what? It is still an error. If your tire doesn't have air in it and you're driving down the street, it doesn't have air in it, and you're supposed to have air in four tires. That's how black and white motion is when we ask joints to do certain things. You're either using the joint correctly or you're using a joint incorrectly. And whenever it's incorrect, it's only a matter of time when really you'll get too fatigued and not be able to do your skill, or where that joint will cause an injury in itself or in another joint that's been accommodating it. So that's why be careful when you go, well, so and so does it, because there are great pitchers. But I always say, wow, they're great. And they could be way much better, even, which is really scary when you think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you want triple digits, you have to do everything correctly. So now, one of the things I want to talk about before we look at the photos, and Larry, I think you and I were discussing this when we were looking at some video from one of your players. So because I said the stride starts from the top of the knee lift and then it ends when the foot touches the ground, you have to be very careful about the way you create the stride as you lower your leg and go towards the front foot. Because what you have to have, the reason why you want an efficient stride, is so that you can rotate correctly in the next phase. If you do something prior to the stride phase that causes you to lower your leg in a strange way and swing your leg in a strange way or turn your body in a strange way, you're going to end up with a false length to the stride. And if you get a false length to the stride, you will not be able to commit your weight to the front leg, which it needs to be committed to the front leg so you can do what happens next, which is rotate. You also, if you have a false length to your stride, you will be forced to keep your body weight backwards towards the southern direction, and therefore your hand will not be as close to the plate as possible. And usually when a pitcher has this problem, they're usually 10 to 16 inches off. I mean, seriously off, because the body has to stay so far back. So you want to be sure when you're looking at the stride and you're looking at whether a stride is efficient, if you see that he has trouble, that there's something wrong with his stride, his foot seems to be landing correctly, but he certainly isn't over the front leg, because the purpose of the stride is to get you to the front leg. And what that means is get the hip joint over the leg, get your body weight over that leg. That's the end of the stride. So when you are turning, you're actually getting more over the front leg. If a pitcher can't do that, and I call it sitting in a chair, Larry, do you know what I'm talking about when I say that? Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
the body looks like it's stuck in between both feet. It looks like it's in no man's land. Sometimes the pitcher will go forward and then pull backward. His knee will straighten backward in the southern direction, and you'll see this like triangle front leg. Well, that is a stride that is probably either the wrong length, or he didn't know how to use the rear of his body to actually get to the front leg. But here's the deal. That is usually occurring because of something you did on the way up to the top of the knee lift. On your way to creating the stride, if you do something that's got too much motion to it, too much speed to it, you come off that back leg and you're going so fast or so wildly that you end up with this very long stride, almost like you leaped onto your front leg. And then what you end up with is the inability to rotate. So the stride can have a problem with direction. It can have a problem with where the foot lands, but it also can have a length problem. And the answer to that isn't to go, okay, well, I'm going to shorten his stride. No, you get into trouble. Some cases, maybe this isn't true, but you get into trouble when you start to try to adjust a pitcher's stride length without looking at the cause of why his stride is too short or is too long. The guy who stands up when he pitches and he just looks like he's taking a step. And you see that with youth pitchers a lot. Or the guy who's just too long and his legs are way out there. You get false length to the stride. Now, your bones are always the same length. And if your back leg is completely stretched out and your front leg is in a lunge position, a sideways lunge position, your stride can only be so long unless you got some artificial length to it, in which case your rotation phase will suffer. So it's very important that when you are looking at something strange with the stride, here again is a reminder, don't work with the stride. Start with what he did prior to the stride. And this is always usually the case when you have a stride length issue and when your foot goes down in a crossed over position. It's also usually from something you did in the way you positioned yourself at the top of your knee lift, because if your knee lift is rotated back towards the outfield and you're getting some swinging effect with the leg, that leg doesn't have enough time to move all the way into position. It goes down. So picture a clock and picture a pitcher. The 12 o'clock is down at the bottom of the hill. The pitcher's standing at 6. He's a right-handed pitcher. If he lifts up his left knee and he turns away, southern direction, and he turns back and swings around, his foot may land at 1 instead of 12, if that's where it was going to land, because he didn't have time, because he swung so far out, his arms are going and his legs haven't landed. So now he knows he's got to be down. So he puts the foot down. So when you're looking at misplacement of feet, you're looking at stride lengths that don't make sense to you. And this is when you look and go, wait, that doesn't make sense. Usually when it's wrong, you'll get an intuition it's wrong. You may not know how to touch it, but something won't be right visually. Go to what they're doing prior to the knee lift. That's why what you're going to see is on one of my drills, which we're going to go to right away here, the top of the knee lift, when you're teaching a stride, always make it clean. Have it be no twisting, no nothing. So when you're teaching, you take away bells and whistles. And if that fixes the problem, then you start the subject of maybe making that adjustment. Larry, do you know who I'm talking about, the video, one of the many you've sent me?
I do, yes.
Yeah. So what he was doing was his stride length was so long, and I didn't have video from all sides, so I can't tell you why, but his stride length was so long. So guys, picture this. When you're standing and you see during the stride, before the foot lands, the lower body starts to rotate. So when he lands, he's almost got his hips facing the target. That's called early hip rotation. He wasn't able to stay sideways because he was looking for his landing, and he had to turn to create more length because his leg was so far out there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Yeah. So let's get to the visuals, and so I can do some talking. So for everyone who's listening, I hope you've gotten some concepts, but these will all become clear when you see. So there's 11 things up on YouTube. So go back to my YouTube channel, Angel Borrelli Pitching, and you'll be able to see in the teaching moment section of this podcast, you'll be able to go and hear this part of the podcast so that you can see the visuals while you're listening, and it'll be great. So Larry, for you, go ahead and open up the first email attachment that I sent you.
Got it.
Okay, great. And this is the start of as I said, this is where we look at the start of the stride. So the stride is right here at the top of the knee lift. And you have to, if you're working with the camera, go up, go down, go up, so you can actually see where is the pitcher's top. So that's the top of the knee lift. And now go ahead and open up number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is an important thing to understand here, because this is where the stride is headed. When I tell pitchers we're working on your stride, I always give them understanding first, and then I give them some feeling second, so that they can get a sense of what's happening. But one of the most important things to teach understanding is to show them where are you actually supposed to be headed? So when you start to lower that knee, where are you actually headed? You're actually headed to this position. And the position of, if you notice on this is called stride foot contact, and his foot is completely down and his arms are completely up at 90 degrees. He's got a perfect angle to his pitching shoulder. His glove arm is perfect. And if you look at where his belt is, he's basically sideways. The little tiny bit of rotation you see is sometimes just because it's a tightness thing, but he didn't turn into that landing. That's just a little tiny bit of rotation. But he's in such perfect position. He's got plenty of room to still develop and initiate the velocity. So this is where the stride has to end up. If a pitcher understands the destination, then when he creates his movement, it will make more sense to him. So the top of the knee lift to this landing position and the timing of the upper arms with the lower body is just like the timing of a jumping jack. The foot arrives, the arms arrive. It's actually a half jack. And if you have your pitchers do jumping jacks and say, look it, did you have to think about that? Have them do a full jumping jack. Did you have to think about the timing? No. Okay, now do a half jack. They'll come up to a half jack and the timing's perfect. Say, did you have to think about that? They'll say no. And that's because the shoulder muscle and the hip muscles, which have sort of the same name and they work in the same plane, they know how to do this together. It's kind of an innate timing. So it's really it's helpful when the pitcher knows if he doesn't block that innate timing, he's going to be able to do a better job. So now I want you to go to number 3. And this is actually the muscle that creates the stride. So for everyone, this is on the side of the body. It's on the side of the hip. And we're actually looking at it from the rear. And what you can notice here is that it is on the very top of the butt muscle. And it's in some of the fibers, as you could see at the top, wrap around to the front. So basically, the way you want to teach this is you want to teach it as if it's on the direct side of the hip. That's how high up it is. So when people are confused about how do you move sideways, this muscle is designed to move the center of mass sideways. It's called the gluteus medius for any of you who want to look it up. And that is the muscle that pushes the pitcher sideways. So when people go, well, is it the foot? Well, is it the knee? Well, is it the front leg? No. This same muscle on the front leg is actually lifting the leg sideways, but the other function it has is to move the center of mass sideways when the foot is down. So this is the location of the muscle. And if you put your hand on it and you just push your pitcher, push him from there, he'll feel it working. Just have him stand with his feet a foot apart, have him put all his weight in his right leg if he's a righty, and just put your hand there and tell him, don't move. And then you push him from this area. He'll go, oh, and he'll feel it. And that's where he needs to initiate the stride from. Isn't that kind of a cool thing to know, Larry?
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And I've done it before, not knowing what the heck I was doing, but I've done something like that before.
Beautiful.
It's cool.
Yes. Well, I always say this, and you're one of the reasons why I know this to be true. You coaches are more genius than you know. And the pitchers are geniuses as well. When both of you are vibing in your genius plane, great things can happen. So I am not surprised, and I know many of you pitchers out there or coaches will be going, oh yeah, and they'll be opening up ideas and maybe recognizing that they knew more than they thought they knew. And notice when you do a jumping jack and you jump outward and just stop, that's actually the position your back leg should be in as you're striding out. You're riding the inside of that back leg to get to that position that you might be in a jumping jack. The leg is lengthening out. So any kind of crazy thing you do in the back isn't going to work. Now, I want to show you a way that I teach feel. And of course, all the pitchers in these videos have given me permission to use them. And none of them were taken with the use in mind of it's for a podcast. This is real time, real educational stuff that I actually was really doing with them. So open up number 4, and the listeners will be able to see it. These are walking lunges up a hill, which the guys call the hill from hell. This thing is so steep, I cannot tell you. So I want the pitcher to know that when he lands in his stride, and when he gets to his stride, the thing that he has to know is what is his next thing going to be? He's going to turn on that leg, but that leg better be in position so he can do what you're seeing Joe do. And this is Joe, who was on the show a few times back. He's going up the hill and he's committing himself to his front leg. The weight is right over the leg. You'll see his knee is right over his ankle. He's in a great position so that if his front leg lands in this configuration, because remember, that's how it's going to land, he's going to turn and he needs to end up here so he can deliver the ball. And so I take them up the hill first. So then the next thing is open up the next video. So now he's doing side lunges downhill so that he can actually get a sense of how it feels to go sideways, but I'm taking him downhill, which is always a different thing for a pitcher to process because he's going downhill. Remember, flat and downhill are completely different. So you can believe before he lifts that right leg off the ground, you can believe he is sure he's in his left hip. And that is exactly where a pitcher has to get his weight. So this is an exercise that teaches feel. And I can tell you, you would be amazed at how, when I was demonstrating this, I could not believe how sore my hip got or how I could feel my hip after like 5 or 6 of them. And I train all the time. It's a great drill. So, okay, now let's go into a little 5-step drill. This is a progression. Probably it could be too elementary for you, Larry, for your guys, but you'll get some ideas from it. But it's a way that I change the landing position. And this was a pitcher that had a pretty good stride, but was landing a little bit too far to where he was leaning backwards. That's another sign when you're standing behind the rubber and you see that he's leaning towards his butt side and you're like, why is he doing that? Well, he's leaning back because his other foot might be his lead foot might be too far forward. And remember, Larry, you like to call it west to east, east to west. You're going to get sideways motion in the body during the stride if the person is going out in a crooked fashion, because the body, if he sticks his leg too far one way in front during the stride, he's going to lean back on that to create balance so he doesn't fall. And that's just a natural way that the body works to keep us up on our feet. So go to the next one. That's number 6 for you, Larry, and it's step 1 in the progression. So here you go. So here is the pitcher putting his foot into the position to create where it's going to go, heel to heel. He strides out. Then he turns the back foot for me to test, do we like this? And there's the purple little thing I put down, and we decided I had a few things. He says, put that down. And what he wanted to do, he said, okay, I'm seeing there's some writing on it and I'm seeing that center. I want to aim for the center. So what we did is you put the heel into your pitcher's heel. It's not behind it. He steps out. Then you test it by turning and see how his feet are in a configuration. And I did correct him because I wanted that rear foot to turn with the shoelaces being more straight. And that's one of the errors you'll see. So don't be afraid to say, hey, I want that back foot to look completely straight. So I'm looking dead on at those shoelaces. But and I like showing video where there's an error because they don't do things perfectly. So this is how you test. Now, if we had seen that foot way over to his right, you would not be able to see the back foot. And that's another way for you coaches to do. If you're filming from behind the catcher, stop him at landing. And if you can't see the rear foot, then he's not going to be in this position. And remember what has to happen next I mean, what happens after the landing, that back foot had to turn this back leg and had to get him square. If he's square and that back foot is over, let's say far to his left, sometimes you see the foot, but it's way over on the other side of the rubber. He's going to have to pull that foot off to complete his rotation. You will never see this configuration. This is lunging position, it's walking position, space between the legs. You can see both feet all day long, every day. It's the way humans move. It is absolutely the most efficient way to create the base for what you're going to do in pitching. Now, does that make sense, that little test?
Perfect. This is great. Absolutely.
So step 2, now he's going to, so we put the little thing down and now he's doing a slide step throw. So what he's doing is, okay, we got you marked. You know where you're supposed to be. We're using that cue. Now go ahead and throw. So now I'm testing to see, does it make sense? And sometimes you'll see that you want to change it a little bit. You know, there's always a standard deviation, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, but you still have to follow the rules. So that's what you see when you get him going. You mark the direction, you test it, and then you start the slide step throwing flat ground. Now, the next thing that you do is, now we're on step 3. Now I'm going to have him add a knee lift, touch down, and go. Now, what am I doing? I'm starting at the beginning of the stride now, but I don't want any funky front leg. So because I'm teaching no bells and whistles, I'm going to have him come up to the top of his knee lift. I'm going to have him stay, tap, and go. And that's going to be the next step to the drill. Now, does that make sense, Larry?
Yeah, this is good. Yep, this is going to help.
Yeah. So now I've got him doing the tapping drill on the mound because everything changes. And what I want you to notice on this drill is that he is hesitating at the top of his knee lift because I want to be sure he's loaded on that rear leg so he's not falling. If he's loaded on that rear leg, like you will see, then he can stay up there and do whatever he wants. But if he is not loaded on that hip, his stride will occur when the body feels it's off balance, and then he has to go forward. He should go forward when he decides to go forward. And see, sometimes when you have inefficient motion, you're not in control. You're going because you're off balance, and the body said, okay, it's time to go. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. 100%.
Yeah. And you see that all the time. Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, okay, let's go to the next video we have here. And now we have the proof is in the pudding. So now here we go. And I've got him pretending to tap. I don't know if you guys use the word pretend. I'm a female. I go, now pretend to tap. So, but I call it the pretend to tap drill. So I get him tapping. Then I say, now pretend you're going to tap, but don't tap. And then you're going to see a little different front leg. It's going to and they all do it differently. Like sometimes I say to a guy who gets his leg too far out, no, I want you to tap right next to where the bow of your shoelaces attaches. But he, as you notice, he actually comes a little bit in front, but it didn't throw anything off. And how did I know that? Because of his landing. And he loved this whole thing. In fact, he said this was one of the best instructional sessions he ever had because he was giving him a chance to feel things. And I know absolutely when he's in a game, it's not going to look like this possibly, but you know what? You start with something that makes sense. Now, the last slide, I mentioned loading. Okay, so this last slide is another drill that I do. If you get a pitcher who cannot load on his back hip, so he's falling and it's out of control, this is the way I have them throw. I have them start with their foot across. And as you're noticing when he does this, notice that his back leg is completely loaded. And actually, his hip, that gluteus medius, is a little bit pushed south. And here's the deal about it. This is probably boring information, but That muscle works the best when it starts with a little pre-stretch of about 15 degrees. So when you notice, I have him crossing over because you see how it pushes his hip a little bit southward towards the outfield. That way, you know, he is totally not only loaded, but he's actually pre-stretching that gluteus medius so that it can give him nice, clean movement. And there we have it.
Now, hey, Angel, that last slide I didn't get from you. I don't see it, but I'm envisioning what you're doing. Is he taking his left foot and lightly crossing it over his right
he's
foot?
actually got the toe. Actually, Wendell, could you send him the 11th video as soon as
Sure thing, Angel. No worries.
everybody? Wendell is the most fantastic editor in the world, who I finally have a reason to bring him on the air. And he's learning how to pitch, by the way. So, Wendell, if you get a chance, could you send that to Larry? Because it's real important. And I can't believe I goofed up on that.
No, it's fine. I'm envisioning it because
well,
I
you
think
know
I
what?
do
If you didn't get it, Wendell didn't get it either, but I think he got it. Did you get it, Wendell?
Yeah, I got it. And I just forwarded it to you, Larry.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and there's Wendell proving that he's there. And all of you probably know that these podcasts require tons of editing, but don't edit this stuff out, Wendell. I want to make you a star.
Okay, this can stay in.
You'll be getting that in a second. But yes, that's what he's doing. So what he's doing is, if a pitcher can't load that back hip, let's say as he's bringing the leg up, he's doing what you guys call drifting. Picture the worst drifting problem you've ever seen. The pitcher starts to lift up, and he's not having a low knee lift. He's having a high one. But because of his range of motion, flexibility, whatever, he wasn't on the back leg to begin with. Let's say his knee lift is halfway up and he starts coming off his back leg. So we call it drifting, right? And let's think of the worst, most serious problem. That's a problem for the stride, right? Because the stride's going to start at the top of the knee lift. He's in the middle of his stride when he gets to the top. Do you see how crazy that could be for timing? So the crossover drill, which you'll see in a second, but
yeah, I see it. I'm watching it.
Okay. He is loading his back hip, and see how it's a little pre-stretched there, Larry?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that is going to provide for a great feeling for him of where he needs to be. So you have him do this, and then you go back to the tapping drill so that and of course, one of my favorite things to do is, you have him get to the top of his knee lift and you say, stay, 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 go. And they really, if they can't stay, then they're not loaded. So this teaches feel for the pitcher who doesn't know and understand his rear leg and how to load the hip. Remember, the rear hip is the hip of the only leg on the ground. I cannot stress this enough. It's the funniest thing I say, and it's the most realistic thing I say. The rear leg is the only leg on the ground. If you're not in control of it, or it's controlling you because you're off balance, it affects the stride, which affects rotation, which affects the way the arm comes through, which affects the velocity, which affects the location.
No doubt. Oh, this is good. Really good stuff.
Okay, so now I think you had a question about the way the foot touches down.
Yeah, you already addressed the direction, and because I think that was huge. I think that's really important. But the other thing would be, like, you see the guys that, again, you see them do it at all different levels. What about guys that heel strike, and then if that's not the optimal way to land, is it the entire foot at the same time? Is it slightly the ball of the foot? What's ideal, and what are the risks, or what are the things that can go wrong by your heel being the first thing that's down?
Yes. Well, the way we love it, and in fact, one of the videos you sent me of the guy who rotates too soon with his back hip has the most perfect landing. The way we love it is that the foot goes down flat. We love that because the second that hits, think of all the energy that's transferred up through all the surface connections of that foot. That's cool. And it also means the pitcher had committed enough weight to the front leg where his foot could actually be underneath him. Okay, which is how we are when we're walking or when we're running. All right. Now, that's ideal. How many times have I seen that? I could probably count on two hands. since 1995. Second way, ball of the foot, because that's kind of a common way to land. And that's also an acceptable landing that usually doesn't affect the motion. But that is stride foot contact. That is when you don't wait till the foot goes flat to call it the end of the stride. Because the minute he touches down, he's going to start rotating his back hip and his pitching arm. And that's what the beginning of the rotational phase is. What we don't want is landing on the heel. Now, everybody picture this. Picture yourself on the steepest hill ever, and you're walking down. You're going to land heel first. Why? Because you're trying to slow yourself down. And we don't want to slow down. In the pitching motion, you want to be slow and controlled at the beginning. And when the foot lands, boom, you're turning with all the speed you can, because guess what? That's the speed phase. The beginning of the speed phase is the rotation. So not only are you, one, slowing down as you land, you are jarring the entire motion. It's like I always say, driving into the wall without putting on the brakes. Transitioning between the phases is critical. Understanding the role of the phase. People think, and I know this is taught a lot, and this is why the little gadgets and things people have that try to get the pitcher to be more powerful in his stride, you've got to be careful. We want intensity that's in the pitcher's head, but we need control so he transitions into his landing and then boom, it's go time. Because guess what? The minute the foot lands, you've got the energy of the earth pushing through you. Not much of the foot's in contact with the ground when it's on the heel, right?
Correct.
Plus, he's still positioning that foot as he's turning, because remember, as soon as he touches down, no matter with what part of the foot, he's going to turn. So that's the second part. He's unstable. Third, the reason why the foot doesn't move is because when you're during this crazy motion where you're actually rotating over the front leg and going forward over the front leg, the most stable foot, and you don't want it to move, is the flat foot, or once it lands in the ball, you immediately then, you're putting the foot down. Your weight over the foot is what keeps your foot from spinning. If you're on the heel or the toe, that's another bad thing. And the ball of the foot is different than the toe. Heel or toe, you're going to get spinning action. And probably if you're landing incorrectly, you're going to be spinning in the direction of your front leg, which means you're going to spin out and land on the ground. That's why I've always looked at pitchers' follow-throughs to understand how they're controlling their power and their motion, because if they're spinning, you know the direction of the force. And guess what? The force needs to be going forward, not sideways. And so anytime you take a part of your foot, just walk on your heels for a few steps today, everybody, and see how weird that is. And walk on your toes and see how weird that is. And then appreciate how great it is when your foot's under you and you actually transfer weight thoroughly through that foot. So the heel landing is something we don't want to see, but that usually occurs because the pitcher's stride, he's sticking his front leg out and looking for the ground. And so something's off with that. And of course, we hopefully have learned from this podcast that when you see that, back it up to the top of his knee lift, look at what he's doing, look at how he descends, how he starts that stride. And, if you see a problem there, look and see if the way he lifts his knee to the top of the knee lift is a problem. So there's something going on in the back end. But Larry, one of the things I find most amazing about all of this is here we are, the job is to throw the ball, and all these things getting in the way of it happen before the front foot even lands.
Right.
I mean, don't you think that, like for me, I swear it's in the 90% range, the errors that occur in pitching start before the front foot even lands.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And it's the simplest part of the motion, in my opinion.
Yep, I believe so.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Now, do you have any other questions that might be burning questions that other coaches might be wondering about?
One more.
Okay.
I think we spoke about it a little bit. I had a guy in the minor leagues that we really paid attention to it, and I've always kind of kept an eye on it since then. But when they lift, the pitcher lifts his legs to his hands, so to speak, or he gets to the top of his leg lift and he starts towards the plate. You see some guys. I've seen one guy in the big leagues that is successful and that doesn't. That's Tim Hudson. But they sit. The real deep bend in their back leg. They really, really sit. And I think I don't know if it's being taught a lot lately, but you sure see it a lot. And I think maybe because of the emphasis on, velocity and whatnot. But I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. And I just want maybe some clarification to maybe let me know that I think I'm on the right track. I try to avoid it. I try to avoid our guys doing it, to avoid them sitting deep. I don't want their first move, what I call their first move, to be down. I want their first move to be down towards the plate, down towards the catcher, not a deep sit.
Yes. Okay. Well, once again, your intuitions, and you've got a good eye, and I can explain it to you. Now, I was working actually with one of the A's pitchers when Hudson was pitching, and I said, and it's in writing somewhere, I said, that guy is going to have a hip injury or an inner thigh injury, which in fact he did. Okay, sinking too low. Now, here's the deal. This is natural. In sports, our job to train sport performance is to control what the body wants to do or can do to make it do just what you want it to do. So when a body moves sideways, so think of a basketball player. He's up tall, and then let's say he gets to the player. He's up tall when he's running, and then he gets to the player to defend him. He's going to always lower his center of mass a little bit. In life, when we move sideways, like if I just said to you, I want you to take 5 steps sideways, like you're protecting or defending or something, you're going to lower your center of mass. That's natural because when you bend your knee slightly, you've got more muscles working around the knee joint. You've got the front muscles working. You've got the hamstrings on. You are actually creating more tension around a joint, so you're actually more stable. But anytime someone doesn't have control over some natural motions, it gets excessive. So the pitcher's going sideways. So he's going to lower a little bit. That's why you always see a little tiny bit of lowering and a little bend in the standing leg. But if he loses, if he doesn't know, he's not strong enough. He's not strong enough, or he's not aware enough. Gravity will pull you all the way down. Now, in that position, Larry, here's a few things that are happening. One, the reason why we have a downward hill is so the pitcher is up, and he's got this advantage where the ball's coming downward into the hitter. When you lower yourself too low as a pitcher, you're creating a level playing field for you and the pitcher. So you're taking away a huge mechanical advantage. That's number one. Number two, if you do that, you have to be in your heel, because when you lower, your knee goes too far, where you're going to use the north-south. We're talking about a righty, north, south, west, east. If a righty lowers too much, his knee goes too far east, and his butt has to go west or he's going to fall. So we got east-west balance, okay? Now he's moving sideways, like we learned today how to do, and he is going to land with his leg too low to the ground. When he turns, because he's too low to the ground, he's already giving way to gravity. Gravity is now having a party. It got you when you were lowering. It's continuing to keep you low. You land, it pulls you down even more. And now you can't get over your front leg. Now you are transferring energy that's sinking into the ground instead of going up. And you probably cannot. You have to be looking like you're sitting in a chair almost when you deliver the ball, because right now your body has given into gravity, which is now having a party, pulling you further down, and you're doing the best you can to turn and throw. You're going to be all arm in the sense of that you're not transferring energy, and also you were a little bit off balance at the beginning. So that pitcher has the right idea to lower, but he went into his heel, lowered too much. You have to keep the weight in the long bones of the foot, which is right underneath your shoelaces. He has to be shifting backwards. He gets the wrong height. His stride's the wrong height. His landing's the wrong height. Gravity's pulling him down. He's got some energy going up, and there it is. That's the effect of sinking too far. And in a sense of just when I look at an athlete who's doing some performance, he is not controlling a part of his body, which is easy to not control because gravity's always pulling us down, but he's not letting the action we want to happen. In other words, his body's doing that naturally. Part of sports training is to not have some natural things happen so other things can happen, because muscles do all their actions at one time. When we're controlling it and training it, which is what sports performance is about, when you're doing that, you're omitting and teaching him, don't give into this so you can do this. He's giving into something and it's controlling his whole motion. So he lost control in the first few seconds, but it's easy to understand because that's what's happening. Gravity loves pulling you downward. Okay. And now I haven't seen this picture, or I didn't see his full motion. Does he do any of those things that I mentioned?
No, I've just seen in the past.
I gotcha.
I don't particularly have anybody. I had a guy a couple years ago that did it. It was constantly something that was a key for him, or something that we kind of monitored to make sure that he didn't, sit too deep, that his first move wasn't down, that it was more down the hill. So it's something that I've always kind of kept an eye out for, and was hopefully on the right track, which it sounds like I was. So that's good.
Yeah. Now you have the reasons for it.
Perfect. You explained it a heck of a lot.
That's my job.
Than I do.
It's my job. Just don't ask me what pitch to throw on a 3-2 count.
There you go.
Okay. Well, Larry, do you have any other questions on the stride? And I can't tell you how I appreciate your coming on the show today.
No, this is great. I love anytime that you need or want me to be on, I'm there. This is good. I learn a heck of a lot from doing these podcasts and from talking to you on the phone quite often. So it's helpful.
That's great. And Joe's going to be back. We're going to be starting our next season, which is season 7. We're just ending up season 6. There may be one more preseason podcast, but this may be the last one. And then we're going to regenerate ourselves and start with the season. And I'm waiting to hear from Joe when we're going to be starting that. But he's coming back. And yes, we're going to look forward to having you as another guest at that time. So thank you so much for everything. And for more information about me, please visit my website at www.gymscience.com. And please follow Angel Borrelli Pitching on Facebook and Instagram. And of course, now YouTube as well. So thank you again, and bye, everybody.